The estimate is that on coastal areas, 650 million to 1 billion people will be affected by sea level rise, and another billion will be affected by those billion moving and also by other areas becoming uninhabitable for a variety of reasons. I am overwhelmed. Do everything, everywhere, all the time. That's basically what we're up to as a collective society at this moment in time around the globe. And AREDAY is one of those gatherings where you really begin to understand how broad and how deep we need to go to make some shifts that humanity and all species need for sustainability, for the long term. So I'm really delighted to be back. I see so many alumni, so many friends, a few new faces, and I'm going to take you north. And you may not know it, but elephants are ice-dependent species. And science has helped us determine that. Passed into this presentation. So I'm going to backcast into this. If any of you are fly fisher persons, when you see where you want your fly to go, you look at it, you think about it, you take your cast back and you load your rod by letting that line go all the way back. It gets weighted. And then, boom, and you've hit your target. So I'm going to do some backcasting here. And not all of it is good news, but there is good news coming. So we had on record, as you know, the worst summer as far as heat goes that we've had in recorded history. And this is comparing between 1951 and 1990. We also had droughts in East Africa that were so severe in Ethiopia, Eastern Kenya, Somalia, that giraffes were dropping dead because of no water, no food, and elephants were dropping dead for the same reason, along with livestock and people. All right. And with drought comes fire. And this fire, actually, I used this picture because it was Superior, the town that's just not too far from here. And this other one was near my home in the Roaring Fork Valley. So in droughts, China lost millions of acres of crops, and you can see the drought, U.S. drought monitor, and there's the United States in 2012, and the lower map is 2021. This last year, we were very lucky in the West to have a lot of rains, but the trajectory is continued drought over time. And then on the other side of it, we have atmospheric rivers. And what happens is the warmer the air gets, the more water vapor is held in these atmospheric currents, and when they hit an obstacle, like what happened in California, they have to drop all of that moisture load, which comes in incredible, unimaginable rains. And on the left is Pakistan. 1/3 of the country was underwater. $50 billion worth of damage. And this other one is in Italy. And they were warned of heavy rains. They had no idea what was coming. This is Phoenix, Arizona. And this is a dust storm after a drought, dust coming off the desert, and a very intense thunderstorm that came along with it. And it was quite a show. And this is Brazil. This is the Negro River. I've actually gone up this river pretty far. And the water has become too warm, and the fish died and came to the surface. And of course, when we think about the Arctic, everybody knows, or the Antarctic, we all know about sea level rise. That is the most common event or result of the Arctic or the Antarctic melting. And this is Tuvalu, the minister, the foreign minister, and they are actually looking now on land to move their entire country because they have to relocate, and they don't have money to do it. So all of this leads to, and a little bit of what Sophia was saying, to climate refugees. The estimate is that on coastal areas, 650 million to 1 billion people will be affected by sea level rise, and another billion will be affected by those billion moving and also by other areas becoming uninhabitable for a variety of reasons. So what's really going on here? It's about systems. It's about how our planet works. We have 5 life support systems: the biosphere, the cryosphere, all the snow and ice, the hydrosphere, oceans and freshwater, atmosphere, and the geosphere, which is soil, dirt, land, and minerals, and the Earth's crust. They all are interdependent. So if you lose one, or one starts really diminishing in its eco services, it affects everything else. Right now, the cryosphere is going the fastest. We know what's happening in the Antarctic. The third pole, the Himalayas, the Tibetan Plateau is melting. Glaciers are melting all over the world. Some interesting, scary statistics about what's happening in Europe. And a lot of areas that have been frozen are not so frozen anymore. So this is what you get down here on the bottom. These are the changes that happen. So disruption of food chains, permafrost thaw, methane emissions, all of this is linked to that, the cryosphere, but also all the others because they're being affected. So let's take a look at the cryosphere. This was in the early 2000s. On the top, you can see how much ice and snow cover we had, and the lower image is what we have currently. You cannot see some of the sea ice on this. You see Greenland, which is that white spot there, but you can't see further on the north, the sea ice. And so what we have really is an ice crisis. But in particular, we're looking, my organization, Global Choices, which is all women-led, by the way, we're looking at the Arctic because what happens in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic. It's affecting the entire world systems. So somebody said, I put this in because somebody said, a lot of people don't know where the Arctic is. I know that you all do, but here you go. And you can see that Russia has the most coastline around the Arctic Ocean. And we've got Finland, Norway, Sweden, Greenland, Canada, and the United States. And on the left, that area that's above Greenland, that is the Arctic sea ice shield. Why is it called a shield? Because it protects us from, and we've taken it for granted, it protects us from the sun's heat and radiation by reflecting it back into space. When it starts melting, all of that heat absorbs into the ocean, and that changes land and water temperature. So this is what has been happening. NASA's been taking satellite images since 1979, and you just saw that that is 2020. Well, here we are last month. So you can see, and this is a comparison, that yellow line, to a little over a decade ago. And that's how much we've lost. The light blue is very thin, fragile ice. It does not reflect as well as the thicker ice, which is where it's more white. Summer is midsummer in the Arctic. Now here's what else has happened. They know, scientifically verified, that losing the Arctic ice shield has changed the polar jet stream. So it used to look like it was on the left and on the right. Here are these troughs. When a trough is up, that's all the warm air from the equator. It hits the cold air, it stalls. What do we get? We get heat domes. We get heat waves. When the oscillation is down, all that cold air goes down, and Texas freezes, and Europe has deep, deep cold. It's also disrupted the ocean currents. And this graph just basically shows what a normal on the left, the normal AMOC, which is the conveyor belt, the ocean conveyor belt, would look like. And over here on the right, you see that because there's a mixing of fresh water and cold water with salt water, it has changed the composition of the water column, and consequently it is slowing down the whole ocean, the Gulf Stream, but the whole ocean conveyor belt. Now, this is, I just stuck this in so that you could see here's the coast, eastern coast, and there's Florida. You remember we had 101 degree water, ocean water around Florida. And this is a composite of NASA images, but what you would normally have, you wouldn't have that orange, which is heated current. You would have more of the blue if things were normal in the Arctic. So what about local impacts? I've talked about global. What about local? So permafrost is the Achilles heel of climate change because the emissions have not been calculated, included in almost all the climate models we're using for projections. And so just to give you an idea, 2/3 of Russia's territory is permafrost, and it's melting. Alaska, 85%. Canada, 50%. All of those countries that I showed you have permafrost, and once it starts melting, there's CO2, there's methane. They're also finding viruses and bacteria that evolved with dinosaurs, and they have no idea what they are. So there's an estimated 1,080 gigatons of methane and CO2 in the permafrost, which is more than double what's in the atmosphere right now. And also the food web is being impacted, and this goes beyond local. The Arctic cod in the middle there are completely dependent on the ice. They lay their eggs on the bottom of the ice, they eat the phytoplankton and the algae on the bottom of the ice. Their whole life cycle is icebound. We've lost 20% of this fishery. It's one of the largest fisheries in the north. And as the ice keeps melting, well, you know what the prognosis is. And of course, polar bears. I just got back from the Arctic 2 weeks ago in Svalbard, which is at 78 degrees north. It's very close to the North Pole. And the polar bears are having a really, really difficult time. And so are the narwhal, because they are also ice dependent. Our Earth is so finely calibrated, that when we start messing and don't understand what we're doing, we need to correct that quickly before it gets out of control. One of the Inuits that we work with in Greenland was telling us that they're starting to lose continuity in their stories and in their culture, because teaching the younger people to hunt and where the animals go, etc., is not what is happening now. So we know, this was a projection in 2012, that the ppms were going to go up. And now we're at 415, 416, and I read a study the other day that says it could go up to 450. And so what happens, because this is why the sea ice is so critical in determining emissions, because it responds more linearly to less or more greenhouse gases than other systems. So the more there are, the less ice. And the less ppms, the more ice. This came out of the IPCC AR6 report 2021. And this is what they're predicting for low emission scenario, saying that low emission scenarios are 1.5 to 1.8. The 1.8 being an overshoot. Anything over 1.5, they're saying the scientists are saying is an overshoot. If we were negotiating the Paris Accord right now, 2 degrees would be off the table, because we didn't have the science, even then, that was too much. And here we are at 1.2, and we all see what's happening around the world. The other reason the Arctic and the Arctic sea ice is so critical, because it's a trigger for tipping points. So if you look at this carefully, if you look at the arrows, all the arrows to these other tipping points, this came out of the Potsdam Climate Institute. All of these arrows come out of the Arctic. So they don't know exactly what that tipping point will be, but I say let's not find out. There are some other things we can do. So for me, this is the global SOS on climate, because it's human security issue, it's an economic issue, humanitarian, it's climate justice and species justice. It's about the rights of nature. Who owns the ice? Does the ice have rights? Does the ocean have rights? And it's also ecocide. When we know what we know now, and if we're complicit in letting ecosystems go, that is ecocide. And ecocide is about to, in the international court, I think in the next couple of years, it will actually be sanctioned. And ecocide is a criminal charge. And it's a whole systems emergency. I showed you that. So what we've found in what we're doing, which is coming next, is that there's, you all, how many of you saw Don't Look Up? Yeah. So it's like, don't look north. Don't look north. It's so far away. What can I do? What can I do in Denver, Colorado, or South America? So literally, our Earth's climate is on thin ice, literally. And most people don't understand that that is truly the case. And we can't afford any more missteps by global leaders. And if you look at the guy on the right, that's the PM of Britain, and he just put out 300 leases in the North Sea for oil and gas. So it gets into the investment conversation that we had. So where do we go from here? The Arctic actually can hold global leaders accountable because we can see, you can go on NASA right now and you can see where the ice is. You can go in 2 years and you'll see exactly where the ice is. And then you look at the ppms, it all tracks. So the median rate of the Arctic sea ice shield is a science-driven metric to which accelerated emission reductions can be determined and measured, because we have a very difficult time actually measuring. And many say that the IPCC was very conservative in some of what they were predicting. And you can see by this painting that, we're at the 1.2 now, and we're probably going to go to 1.5 by 2027. That's the prediction. So like a species, we've got a system, a global climate stabilizing system headed towards extinction. And you would think, with all of the global impacts, all of the science, everything that indigenous people have been telling global leaders and local leaders, that they would drop to their knees and say, oh my God, what do we do? What do we do? But not the case. So the ice shield is threatened. All of these interests are hovering. Deep seabed mining, oil and gas, seismic testing, mass tourism, transpolar shipping lane. Those both bring heavy fuels and black carbon, nuclear weapon testing, and radioactive waste dumping. All things that we should never be doing anywhere, but particularly in such a fragile area that has such a big kick for the entire planet. So I'm going to show you this again. And Global Choices, my organization, we looked at all of this science and we said, there's too much at stake. The stakes are too high. We have to do something. And the moment is now. And when I say now, it's like the next 3.5, 4 years before we run out of our carbon budget. And so this is the moment, and we decided that we were going to propose a very bold and audacious initiative. It's the first line of defense for the Arctic Ice Shield. It's a 10-year moratorium. And you can see on the right that the ice shield now retreats to the central Arctic Ocean. And our moratorium covers, on the left, covers the central Arctic Ocean. Now, why the central Arctic Ocean? Because it's non-jurisdictional. No country owns it. So that means regulations are, permitting is, it can be a free-for-all. Shipping and navigation is a challenge because the IMO has, through the law of the sea, has regulation over that. But that's why there's an opportunity here to protect this, because nobody owns it. And in the law of the sea, the high seas, of which the central Arctic Ocean is one, is for the benefit of all mankind. We'll excuse the mankind because that was 1982, so. So what does this look like? This is what a transpolar shipping lane would look like, right over the North Pole, right through that thick ice that I pointed out. But what does it look like on the ground? This is what it looks like. Look at this little guy back here. And seismic blasting and testing, which is a precursor to oil and gas, very disruptive to marine mammals and marine life because they lose their way. It disorients them. And oil and gas. No oil and gas exploration. And no nuclear weapon testing. Russia does test off their shore in the Chukchi Sea. And we're building up our military, but nobody has done anything yet in the central Arctic Ocean. And then no dumping of nuclear waste. And this nuclear waste, Russia dumped canisters like this in the Kara Sea, the western Arctic Ocean. They're coming apart, and they're looking for a new place to dump them. Well, where do you think that would be? And this is no deep seabed mining. And this is a messy slide, but deep seabed mining is messy. So, and these are the nodules on the top right. That's what they look like underground. They scrape, or under the water, they scrape the bottom. These are some of the critters that some of the life that they have found in these areas that they want to deep seabed mine. And why are we not mining our electronic landfills? Why not? Because what they want in these nodules is copper, manganese, cobalt, nickel. And guess what they want them for? And this goes back to the conversation earlier. They want these rare earth minerals for EVs and cell phones. So Tesla came out with an announcement that they're looking to have a battery that uses no rare earth minerals by the end of 2024 or 2025. There's also 40 to 70 million tons of copper in these electronic landfills. So why are we scraping the bottom of the ocean and destroying the biodiversity that's there? So we're pursuing very high-level cooperation among polar players. It's not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but we're getting there. We now have a legal document for countries to endorse, and we have several countries that are ready to do that. Many of them are island nations. They've come to us because they've heard about it. So we are now engaged in a lot of bilateral meetings with ministers of environment, foreign ministers, to move this endorsement forward. We also are partnering with The Economist to do an economic risk analysis to really figure out what are the real costs of losing the Arctic ice shield, and we're going to be looking at the insurance industry and at the agricultural industry, and also 1 or 2 regional areas to really focus in on more local economies and what the cost is really going to be. We've developed an Arctic Legal Defense Fund for a lot of our legal work, and we have attorneys, Harvard, Cambridge, but also a couple firms, Earth Justice, Singapore, we have a couple attorneys, etc. We've got quite a really, really good crew. And then our Arctic Angels. This is a network of networks of just young women who are climate activists in their own right, wherever they live. Our networks are in 39 countries, and Shie is an Arctic Angel. And they are really ice ambassadors, and they are just remarkable. And we just finished a workshop in Portugal around whole systems thinking, whole systems understanding, whole systems decision making, because those who are going to be the climate leaders in the future need to understand that in making decisions. And then we have the Arctic Ice Force. That's anybody, anywhere can join. We're launching the Ice Times, our newsletter, this quarter. The Arctic Ice Force are ice defenders, if you will, and they show up for marches, they show up for protests, they write letters. They're really an activist group. And Sylvia is one of our ambassadors, and she is a real proponent of the Ice Force and the Angels. So if you'd like to become an Ice Force member, here's the QR code. And then there's something I want you to remember, because it takes the ice to the streets, takes it right into your home. 1 ton of CO2 equals 3 meters squared, or 32 feet squared of sea ice melt. And that's Julian Strova and Dirk Notes, who are renowned ice scientists, and they figured that up. So I'm running out of time, I'm over time. There are a lot of things that you can do to be engaged in what we're doing. Love to have you join the Ice Force. We need all the voices. We need a united voice for the Arctic to go to global leaders. And I will say this, when we started this initiative, I had no idea how much education was required of decision makers. They don't know this. They don't know this. And to this forum, to AREDAY, to really, we've got to increase the R&D, the investment and the deployment of hydrogen, particularly for transportation. Because the way it's set up now, it requires deep seabed mining. That's not a good trade-off at all. And take 2 degrees off the table. So I have a lot of hope in the next generation. And we have to do this for the innocents. And the innocents are the children and other species. Their future is dependent upon our greed or our grace. Totally dependent. So the difference in this issue from so many climate-related issues is we can't plant ice. We can plant trees, we can plant mangroves, we can restore wetlands. We've even figured out, if the water doesn't get too hot, how to plant coral. We cannot plant ice. If we lose it all, we also can't reconstruct it, and it can't reconstruct itself. So we have to come together, and we have to make better global choices as a global community and global citizens, and keep our leaders accountable, as we haven't done that. So that's it. Thank you. And here's the QR code to go into our website, and you can see everything there. And I do have these cards of what I showed, the elephants on the ice and the global leaders, and if anybody wants some of those, I have plenty with me. Okay, thank you.